Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rendering in VR webinar. My name is Nick, and I will be doing the presentation with you today. Just like all of our previous webinars, everybody will be on mute, but if you do happen to have any questions at any point during our class, please feel free to go ahead and type that into the questions and answers section. And at the end of the class, I will go through and answer any questions that may have come up. Also, at the end of the class, I will be sending out an email that's going to contain a document that's going to go over absolutely everything that we're going to be covering in today's class. Should you happen to have any questions while going over that document, again, please don't hesitate. Reach out to our support department, and they will be happy to help you out with any of your questions. Again, today's class is on rendering in VR in Envisioneer. So today's class, we're going to be going over rendering a scene, which is going to be the ability to create your photorealistic renderings. This is going to give you pictures that you can actually show to your clients that are going to actually represent what the design is going to look like. Renderings are an excellent marketing tool that can be used on your websites, in your brochures, or for client presentations. Getting a good result, however, can require a bit of prep work, as well as the understanding of how rendering works and the factors that are involved in the rendering process. VR, which is going to be virtual reality, gives that realistic wow factor when presenting a space. There are various tools that allow you to navigate through a space while designing, or how to send a client a takeaway of their space to view on their own mobile device. Today's topics, we're going to be looking at material properties. We're also going to be looking at lighting, rendering settings, the rendering process itself. We're going to be talking about generating VR views, and then we're also going to be talking about uploading those to the panoramic, uploading the panoramic view to our mobile site, and again, or to a mobile device. And again, that's something that we're going to be discussing. And in the document, it will give you a step-by-step instruction on how to do that, as you will need to have your mobile device set up for that. So first, let's talk about material properties. Now, elements in your drawing have materials applied to their surfaces. Every material has finished properties that determine how much the material reflects, emits, and absorbs light. These factors can affect the lighting in a rendered scene, so it's important to make sure that they are set up correctly. If you're viewing my screen right now, you should be able to see that I am looking at a brick bungalow, and it's using a beige brick style. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up and we're just going to use our material paintbrush. So it's going to go up to the material paintbrush. And as long as you're in a 3D view, this material paintbrush will be enabled. Once you select it, you're going to see that your cursor turns into a paintbrush. And over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see that the catalog is now showing up as materials. There are two buttons at the top here. One is going to be a materials applicator. So whatever the material is that you have selected, it's going to apply that material to whatever element that you are actually selecting. Or there is the eyedropper. Now, the eyedropper allows you to find a material that's already in use. So if I select the eyedropper and I bring my cursor in and I click on the brick, it's going to automatically find that brick for me. And then in the catalog, I can see the brick is at the very bottom, and I can just double click on it, and it will bring up the materials for that brick that's being used. Now in here, we're going to see the actual properties. So we're seeing the brick name is called brick 11. And then under the properties, there are a bunch of different controls that we're going to be taking a look at. So first, let's talk about material type. Now, material type determines the luminance or reflectance of the surface. When you choose a material type, only those settings that apply to that type are going to be available for editing. If we use the drop-down, we can see that there are 4 different types. There is generic, diffuse, Lambert, and foam. Generic is the option that allows materials to simulate most surface types. This lets you define each of the available factors. You can adjust the opacity, the specular, the reflection, and all of the other options that we can see in that list. Now, these are going to be edited without the restriction of any particular lighting model. Then we have diffuse, and if I click on diffuse, you're going to see that this simulates a rough or matte material that appears similarly bright from all viewing directions. This is suited for materials such as brick or matte paint. And as you can see here, we only have the ability to adjust the actual diffuse and the bump option. There is nothing else that we can adjust for it. Next, we have Lampert. Now, Lampert simulates a matte or non-shiny surface with no specular highlights. This is again ideal for materials such as chalk, pottery, matte paint, or any kind of an unpolished surface. And as you can see in here, we have the ability to adjust the texture, so the diffuse option, the bump, and then we have a emissive and opacity control. The last option is Phong. Now, Phong simulates a shiny surface with specular highlights. This is again going to be commonly used for materials such as polished wood floors or metals. And in here, you're able to apply a specular highlight as well as all of the other options. By default, almost every single material in the catalog is set to generic for you, and you can again go through and adjust these if you ever want to make those adjustments. I'm going to keep my brick set to generic, and as you can see, I have everything else turned off. So everything is actually set all the way over on the slider, so it is not going to have any of those options taking effect. In the top corner, we can see energy preservation. Now, this refers to the notion that any outgoing energy cannot be greater than the incoming energy. And based on the combination of your diffuse, your opacity, and your reflectivity components, this value will adjust automatically as you edit those properties. For more realistic materials, this value should be equal to or less than 1. And again, by default, a lot of the materials you're going to find in the catalog are already set up to take advantage of this, and they will all be below 1. Now, in the diffuse area, you can see that there is the option to select the color or the texture. And this is going to allow you to apply the material as seen in your 3D rendered view, or if you are creating a solid color, it will show that in your view as well. So again, you can choose again if you just want it to be a solid color. So it would just be white or whatever color you have selected. Or you can select your texture and it will apply the texture itself. When you enable the texture radial button, you can again apply the texture to the surface. You can use any texture that's assigned in the catalog already. So if you select the little button there, you can see that it brings up the actual brick material, and you can go through the catalog and adjust it to use any other brick texture that you want in here. So you can actually just type in brick and it will go through and start to find all of the other brick options. Then we have the bump option. Now, bump simulates bumps and wrinkles through small displacements on the surface. The modified surface is then used for lighting calculations. For example, when using the Phong reflection model, giving the appearance of detail instead of a smooth surface. To use the texture selected in the diffuse section as a bump texture, ensure that the lock icon next to the bump texture swatch is closed. To select a different texture to use for the bump texture, click on the lock icon to unlock it, and then you can select a texture map dialog, ensuring that you set the type to a normal map. Some textures in our catalog will already have a normal map applied to them. So I'm just going to click cancel here. I'm going to scroll up to brick 1 as an example. And when I open this up, we can see that we have our brick texture. But underneath that, we have a texture assigned, and it looks like a blue image. Well, when you click on that, this is actually just the inverse image or the normal map of the brick material itself. And as you can see, it says normal map. So when we use the little drop down here, we have standard and normal map. Since we are applying a normal map as a bump, we want to make sure that that is set to normal. If I bring up the actual material so you can see it, and we're just going to go in here and we're just going to find normal. So 0, 1 normal, which is going to be, there it is there, brick 0, 1. It's not doing that for me. So we're going to scroll through here. We're just going to find brick 0, 1. And when we find brick 0, 1, brick 0, 1, when I open this up, it's just again showing you the actual inverse of that image. I don't want to make any changes to that. Now, some textures that you find online will include not only the diffuse texture, but also the normal map. So you can copy both into your textures folder. You can also create your own normal maps, but you need to have that knowledge and software that will be able to create that. Photoshop is one of those applications that will allow you to create normal maps based off of a known image. In our example, we're going to use just the brick material that's a part of our wall. And when we go into the appearance tab, we can see that under the properties of this, it's not using any kind of a bump map. If you wanted to have it use a bump map, you can again just use the lock icon and it will find the texture for you. And then you can actually use the bump scale to add in a value that will allow for a bump to take place. Now, a value of 0 means that there is going to be no bump mapping applied to the actual texture. So if I cancel this, cancel, and I go in and I say select all similar, right click properties. So I want to make sure all of my walls take in this new change. And I go into appearance and I select the brick 11 and I double click on it. If I just lock it and I set a bump of 2 as an example, it's going to change the way that that material looks when it is rendered. I'm going to see the variances in the depth and the grout and the wrinkles or dimples in the brick itself. And you may not notice much in the 3D view, but when you render it, you will see an actual difference. I'm just going to go back into our materials paintbrush here. I'm going to bring up our brick material once again. And we're just going to go down to the bottom and select brick 11. And the next thing we're going to see is emissive. Now, this is going to be the amount of light that is given off by a material. You can again click the color swatch to select the color of the light that's going to be emitted. And then you can use the slider to adjust the level of emissivity. The more emissive a material is, the more self-luminous it will appear on the screen. Our brick is not going to be self-luminous. We're not going to apply any kind of an emissive quality to it. We then have opacity. This determines how transparent the material is. Think of this as a mask being applied over the surface. You can again click on the color swatch to select a color for the opacity mask. You can also use the transparent opaque slider to adjust the level of transparency. You can use the dull glossy slider to specify the glossiness of the opacity mask as well. So you can again control not only the color, but how opaque or transparent the material is going to be and how glossy or dull that transparency is. Again, this is brick, so it's not going to be transparent. So we're going to make sure it's completely opaque and it's just going to have a dull finish to it. Same with specular. Specular is the reflection that creates highlights on materials, making them appear shiny. Again, you can click on the color swatch to select a color for the specular highlights. You can again use the slider to adjust the intensity of those highlighted colors. The higher the value, the lighter and therefore shinier the color it will be. You can again use the dull shiny slider to adjust the size of the highlights themselves. So if I did want to apply a highlight to the brick, or if I'm using a different texture, I can again just adjust the specular option, and I can just move that up, and you're going to see it starts to add in this shiny look to it. And then as I adjust the dull shiny slider, it will focus that a bit clearer. So you can actually see that shininess being reduced in that area. So again, you can control again how you want this to look. Again, we're working with brick, so obviously we don't want it to be shiny. Next is reflection, and this just refers to the throwing back of light by a surface. It is used to simulate the reflective objects like mirrors and shiny surfaces. Again, you can click on the color swatch to select a color for the reflected light. Again, use the slider to adjust the amount of reflection, and you can use the sharp blurred slider to determine whether the surface reflects the selected color or its surroundings. Note that the blurred effect may increase your rendering times. Underneath all of that, we have an area called IOR. Now, this is referring to the index of refraction. This describes the way that light bends when crossing the material surface. A value of 1 means that the light will not change direction. Selecting a material from the drop box, be it air, water, crystal, diamond, will adjust the actual IOR properties for you. And you can actually do a search online for different index of refraction variables, and you can go to custom, and you can type in your own value if you wanted to take advantage of that. This will again just help give a more accurate look to how the material would look in real life. The Fresnel option, when enabled, is the reflection strength becomes dependent on the viewing angle of the surface. So some materials in nature, like glass, reflect light in this manner. Again, just note that the Fresnel effect depends on the index of refraction as well. So I'm just going to click cancel on that because I don't want to change anything other than the fact that we just added a bump to our brick here. And then we're just going to go into a 3D view, and we're going to go into our study. So I'm just going to go into a 2D plan view, and we're going to add in some lighting in here because the next area we want to talk about is lighting. Now, direct light and ambient light levels define the light that is reflected. Direct light is light that is emitted from light fixtures. It has a specific color, intensity, and direction. Ambient light can be thought of as a general level of light that is everywhere in the scene. Every light in a scene contributes to the overall ambient light of the scene. If you are rendering an interior view, you need to consider the light sources in your model. Although light coming in through windows is considered during the calculation, you may want to insert interior light fixtures to provide additional light. So if I go into that same 3D view, and I look at this, I'm in a 3D view right now, and I'm not really, the scene itself is showing light because I don't have any kind of accurate lighting turned on. If I went into and I selected realistic, it's going to show it to be a bit darker in this room, and I can start to see the sun creeping in through the windows. If I right click and I go to scene properties, I can adjust the time of day, which will allow me to see how that light is going to look at different times of day in this room. So I can adjust exactly what time of day I want, and it will again give me a more accurate reading of where the sun is going to be hitting this model. I will also need to make sure that I am specified in the correct location and that my building is situated in the north direction correctly as well. So all those factors will take effect when you want to do light studies, if you're trying to show how the sun is going to affect the model that you're currently working on. I'm just going to go back into 2D. And so we've seen that room with the lights, with no lights, just actual ambient light from the scene itself. Now let's add in some actual lights into our design. So to do that, we're going to go up to interiors. And under interiors, we're going to select the interior lights. And then under the interior lights, we're just going to grab a light that we want to use. And I'm just going to grab a ceiling light. And this is going to be a study. So let's just do a ceiling fixture. We'll just do a chandelier. I'm just trying to find a good light for here. You know what, let's just do our clip dome, and we'll just add in a dome light in the middle of that study. And then if I wanted to, I could also add in recessed lights, and I'm just going to kind of drop these guys in like so. So I've added in a dome light right in the middle, and then I've got recessed lights more towards the corner. By doing that, I've added in lights, and you can actually start to see how those lights are affecting the scene itself. So I can see lights on the wall. If I delete this light out, you'll see that that light removes. If I go edit, undo, you can see the light shows up. So as long as you're in the realistic mode, you'll start to see how the lights affect the scene when you're placing them, if you want to use that option. I'm going to go back into 2D. I'm going to double click on the dome light, and we're going to take a look at the actual properties of this light. So in the interior lighting dialog box, we can see that there is a basic tab. This is just controlling the actual size of the light. You can play around with this, adjust the size of the lights if you want to, but they are pretty much set up to be matching certain light fixture types. So you really don't need to play around with them unless you want to adjust it. The lights tab is where you may want to go in and make some adjustments. So in the interior lights tab, what we have in here is the ability to adjust the light source for the particular fixture. And as you can see here, the light source that we are currently using is using a 25-watt compact fluorescent recessed mount light. I can click edit, and I can assign a completely different light source. Each light source that we see in here, again, we have interior lamps, interior ceiling, recessed mounts, we have pendants, chandeliers. These are just different light sources and how they disperse light within a scene. A recessed mount light is going to cast light in a down direction. A pendant light will cast light up and down in your scene, but it will be focusing more in the down direction. A chandelier will cast light equally both up and down in the scene. A flush mount will again just cast light down in the scene itself. And again, each of these also controls the color. So again, based on the fact that this is a compact fluorescent recessed mount, it's going to use a light blue color. If I was using your incandescent light, like this one here, it's going to be a bit more of a warmer color. You can again play around with these, see what's going to work best for your design. I'm going to bump this one up to a 30 watt, and it's just going to brighten it up just a little bit. And I can also control the position. So when I add in a light source and you're under the lights tab, you'll see a little mark that indicates where that light source is. In Envisioneer, we do not want to place the light source inside of the light itself. This can cause some undesirable effects because you're casting light through geometry, and it can create artifacts in your scene. We just want the actual light to be emitted from the face of the light itself. So here we move the light source out of the light, and we make sure that it sits completely out of the fixture itself. Now, there are some instances where we do have the light source more situated closely to the light fixture itself. And again, this is going to be, pardon me, taken into consideration based on the light itself. If it is a canister light and it is open, then yes, you can move the light source into the light because it's not going to be shining light through glass. It's just going to be situated inside of the light fixture. But if it has to go through any kind of a glass feature and it's completely hidden, I would not add that light source in. As an example, so you can see what I'm referring to, there is a light in here that we do this for. I'm just trying to find it. Chandeliers, I believe it is this one here. So if I double click on these ones here, and I go into the lights tab, here you can see that the light bulbs are inside. Then we have a glass cylinder, but the light sources are inside of the actual cylinder. That is okay because we're not putting the light completely inside an enclosed area. It can still cast light out and not cause any kind of a geometry issue. So again, you'll play around with this, figure out what's going to work best for the light fixture that you're working with. But that is a good tip for you to keep in mind. You can also adjust the light orientation. So how do you want this light source to be oriented in the design? So here it's hard to see, but there is a yellow dotted line that's pointing down. And you can see it kind of when I move it, you can see that yellow dotted line. It is pointing down. It is a recessed light, so we know that that light is going to point down in our scene. But if you wanted to adjust it, you can move it on a 45-degree angle. You can move it to a 90-degree angle. Again, you can play around with those values and adjust them as needed if you wanted to adjust like a point light as an example. At the very top is the brightness percentage. Now, the brightness percentage, you can again adjust this. By default, we have it set to 1,000. This just helps you make sure that the light itself is powerful in the scene. Sunlight is going to be more powerful, so we want to adjust the actual brightness percentage of our interior lights to help accommodate that. I usually start at 1,000. If I find that it is casting too much of a burn in the ceiling, I'm seeing too much of the light in the ceiling, then I will either adjust the wattage down or I will adjust the actual image brightness down. And I usually drop it by about 250, and then I take a look and I see what it looks like. So as an example here, if we take a look at that and we go to camera 1, and let's just pull this camera back here a bit. We can see it in the ceiling. So if we find that it is casting a really bright light around here, then I know that that is too bright. And right now it actually looks pretty good. So I'm not going to adjust it. I'm just going to move that light or that camera down a little bit. And we've now added in lights into our design. So next we're going to be talking about rendering settings. There are two different groups of settings that are considered when a scene is being rendered. Your global settings determine your location in the world and the time of day. This will determine where the sun is sitting on the horizon and therefore how much daylight will be in the scene. There are also various 3D real view settings that determine what the rendering result will be. With your 3D view displayed, we're going to go up and we're going to select the View Render 3D Real View. So we're going to go up to View, Render 3D Real View. This will bring up the 3D Real View dialog box. And then we can go down and we can select Options. Now under Options, there is a Global. And under Global, we can control where we are in the world. And we can control where the north arrow sits in relation to our design. And you can use this as a scroll. You can just kind of move it around yourself, or you can type in the actual angle if you want to. You can also adjust the plant season. So how do you want the plants to look in your design? You can adjust that as well. We're going to keep ours set to summer. Then under the 3D Real View option, this is where you can adjust how you want this rendering to take place. Now, When you're creating your very first render, I always recommend just going through a low level quality rendering first. What I mean by that is when I take a look at the ray trace quality, we have the level option. This is the level of quality in the resulting 3D real view image. There are 5 levels to choose from. Note that the higher the level is, the longer the rendering will take. So if you want to create just a very quick rendering just to see how things look in your design, don't go to the highest quality. It's going to take the longest to render. I usually stick at the low to medium option, depending on the computer I'm working with. And then I also make sure I adjust the anti-aliasing. Now, the anti-aliasing is the ability to blend pixels in areas where 2 colors or 2 materials meet. This helps to reduce artifacts, or what we call the stare effect. If you look in our design here in the corner, you can see how the line looks a little bit jagged, especially over here on the trim. You can see it's a little bit jagged. When you have that anti-aliasing bumped up to 5, when you render, it will smooth that out into one nice clean line. Anti-aliasing will also increase your rendering times. So if it will take a little bit longer at level 5, but I always have mine set to 5 just so I'm making sure it looks correct. When I am happy with a rendering and I can see, okay, this actually looks pretty good, I will then go through and add in all the rest of my little knickknack stuff like couches and pots and furniture, interior accessories, things like that. Once I'm happy with the placement of everything, that's when I will bump it up to the highest level. And I will usually let that render either over a lunch break or when I leave for the day, I'll just let it run because depending on the size of the file and how much you've added in, that rendering could take anywhere from about 30 minutes to a couple of hours. So again, play around with what you're trying to render with first at a lower quality to make sure that it looks correct. And then once you're happy, you can bump up the quality. So we're going to leave our set to medium. We have anti-aliasing set to 5. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking at is the environment. Now, electrical light noise reduction is the ability to create noise in a rendered image refers to areas of graininess. This can happen in interior scenes that mix your sunlight and your interior lights. Increasing the noise reduction value will reduce noise in your renderings, although the rendering may take a little bit longer. I, again, will keep that at 1 for the default, and I will see how it looks. Skylight noise reduction. When you're increasing noise reduction, it reduces the amount of graininess that can occur when sunlight is coming through a skylight. So very similar to the electrical light noise reduction, but this is referring to any kind of a skylight. Then we have tree and billboard intensity. This is the brightness contrast of trees and photo boards in the rendered scene. Again, leave it at 35 to start with. If you find that your plants are starting to get a little washed out, then you may need to adjust the actual tree or billboard intensity. Again, another tip here is I again leave these set at 1. Even if they look a little bit wrong in the lower level, I will wait till the higher level and see how it looks. If I render it in a higher level, it will also help reduce some of these issues. If you still find that there's a bit of a noise issue, like pixelating in your image after a high level rendering, then I would adjust the electrical lights or the skylight or the tree and billboard intensities. Once you're happy with everything, you can simply select apply and then OK. Now you're in the actual 3D render scene and you have further controls over where you want to move the camera and what you want to see when you're rendering. So I'm going to move that camera just a little bit and we can now see I can see the door and the windows and the floor in this scene. I can also adjust the size. So this will allow us to adjust the actual size of the render itself. So before we go through and start to create this rendering, we're going to start talking about the rendering process itself. So the program can take anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes to calculate the solution, depending on the number and complexity of elements in your drawing and the level of the ray trace that you have chosen. You can stop the solution if needed and then start it again at any time. You can save time by saving copies of your model and removing any extra elements that will not be visible in the rendered view. For example, if you will be doing an exterior rendering, you can gut the interior of the house. That way you're not rendering anything that is unneeded in that scene. If you will be doing a rendering of the kitchen, you can eliminate everything in the model except for the rooms that are adjacent to the kitchen and any landscaping that is not going to be visible through the kitchen windows. When Envisioneer renders an image, it looks at every element and how light will reflect off of it based on the material settings. Extra elements mean extra time needed to perform your lighting calculations, and the larger the file sizes will be. So here again, we're in our 3D Real View option, and we can see that we have a couple of other controls here. So we have the image size. So what is the size of the image that you want to create? I'm going to leave mine set to 800 by 600 for right now. The higher the size that you make, the longer the rendering will take as well. So again, adjust that as needed. Then we have brightness. Now, this is going to be the overall brightness of the image. Lower values darken the image, while higher values will make it brighter. You can adjust this value during or after the rendering process. However, it must be adjusted prior to selecting save. So I'm going to start my render right now. So I'm just going to click start. And while it's going through the rendering process, we're going to see these controls, and I'm just going to go through them and discuss what they actually are. So we've looked at brightness. Now we can talk about burn. Now this is a parameter that controls the intensity of the highlighted areas. This can be a decimal value between 0 and 1. Lower burn values will decrease the intensity of the highlights to avoid a burned out look in the scene. You can adjust this value during or after your rendering process, but again, it must be adjusted prior to selecting save. Gamma is the gamma correction control of the overall brightness of an image. Lower values will darken the image, while higher values will make it brighter. You can again adjust this value during or after the rendering. Images that are not properly corrected can look either bleached out or too dark. And then there is a convert to grayscale. This saves the rendered image as a monochromatic image with varying shades of gray. So if you're trying to just show a client the overall design for spatial concepts and you're not trying to make them focus on actual materials, you can select the grayscale option, which will basically just make it gray. And they'll see the way that things look, but without any kind of a material assigned to them. Once you're happy with the rendering and it's complete, the save option will be enabled. When you click this button, you can then save the rendered image as a bitmap, a JPEG, or a TGA file. You will be prompted to specify a file name and a save location. You can also click the down arrow next to the button and select a launch viewer to open the image in the editing application that is associated with images in Windows Explorer. There is also a reset option. This will reset the view in the preview window back to its pre-rendered state. So you can say, I'm not happy with the way that this looks, so I'm going to reset it and I'm going to start over and make adjustments to how I want this rendered scene to look. If you're happy with it, you can click save. Here's what it does when it's converted to grayscale. So again, it just removes the color, but you can still see the light and the shadows within the scene. And as you can see, there is a bit of graininess over here on this wall. But since I was at a lower level quality of rendering, I'm not too concerned about it. So I will omit that for right now. And when I do a higher quality rendering, I will keep notice of that and say, how does that look in a higher quality rendering? If I find that it is still a bit too grainy, that's when I will adjust the electrical light noise reduction so that it helps clean that up. Once you're happy, you basically just select save and save it to your computer in an area that you want. And I'm just going to save that as rendering VR JPEG, and we're just going to say save. Once you're done, you can simply select close. I'm going to go into a 3D exterior view, and I'm going to open up the front door here. So I'm just going to go to the properties, and we're going to go into the 3D open. I'm going to open that door up 50% as well. And we're just going to open that door up so we can walk in. The next thing we're going to be talking about is presentation in virtual reality mode. So in presentation mode, you navigate using an external controller, such as a video game controller, or you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. If you have a virtual reality headset, you can create a 360-degree virtual reality viewing experience for your client. When navigating in presentation mode, you will not walk through walls or any other objects. Instead, you will walk up and down stairs, step onto decks, and walk through any open doors just as you would in real life. And that's why I opened that front door. To enter presentation mode, you're going to select view, and then you're going to select presentation mode. Or in a 3D camera view, you can move your mouse down into the bottom area and you can select this presentation mode button down here. So you go to view and you can select the presentation mode, or you can select the presentation mode button. This will bring up the presentation mode dialog box, and you can enter the presentation mode with a light map or with none selected without a light map. You have two choices, again, presentation or VR to view the model. VR will be grayed out unless you have a VR headset plugged in. Now, I'm just going to take a quick moment here to talk about light maps so we can understand what they are. In presentation mode, you can use either the default realistic mode for appearance or your saved light maps. Light maps used baked lighting, giving the scene a more realistic and finished appearance. Baking means it is a pre-calculated scene based on given information like materials and lighting. It is then stored so that you can reuse that information later on. When entering presentation mode, you can generate and save your baked light maps. So here we can see that we have none selected because we haven't created a light map. I can click on this little light bulb here, which is essentially allowing you to generate a baked light map. And when you click on that, you can give that light map a name. You're going to want to make sure that it's specific to the file that you're working with, so it's easily identifiable. And if it's associated to a specific room or view in that model that you're working with, you're going to want to make sure you include that name in it as well. So in this case, the file I'm working with is rendering VR. So I would say rendering VR is the file name. And then I would put a dash and I would say exterior walkway or kitchen or whatever the scene is that I'm actually going to be using this presentation mode for. Then you have your settings, and this allows you to control what you're actually going to be rendering. Now, the scene type, this is applicable to your current camera view. Does the anticipated presentation include just a single room or the entire extent of the model? Understanding that the more rooms, floor levels, and interior and exterior spaces that you include in your selection means the longer it will take to create your baked scenes for all of the rooms. Again, you can select from that list your interior option, which will be just the interior of the model, including all locations, or you can do interior of the current location, which is going to be the interior of the current floor location only. Then you have exterior, which will do only the exterior. You then have the interior and exterior option, and this will be the entire interior and exterior. This will take the longest time to bake. You then have your filter point spacing, and you can see that the interior points are set to 10 feet. Now, these are going to be the values. Entered is the spacing of the invisible grid over the scene in each room. At each grid point marks a camera's new potential position and a recalculation of the illumination in the room to avoid shadow areas that the original camera could not see. A lower grid means a longer processing time. The default, again, is set to 10 feet. Then we have GI cache quality. Now, this is the quality of the shadow effects. The more accurate, the longer the processing time, and the more video memory it will use to calculate. Although having a more accurate quality may be desired, it does take considerable time and video memory to reproduce. The default setting is usually in the less to middle option, so you can again control that as needed. Once you're happy with all your settings, you essentially just create the GI cache, and it will step through and create a new baked light map. And once it is done, it will be a part of that list. I'm not going to create a light map for what we're doing today. We're just going to simply go into presentation mode. Once I select presentation mode, it's going to now show me that scene. And what I'm going to be able to do now is use my arrow keys on my keyboard to walk around. And I can see the plants that I've added in. I'm going to walk up the front steps, and I'm going to walk into the front door of this design. And as I walk through, we're going to see the different rooms in our design. If the doors were open, I would be able to walk through the doors. Since the doors are closed, I can't actually walk through those. And you can again see all of these different rooms. If I had a baked light map enabled here, I would see lights in these rooms. If you find that the rooms are too dark or the views are too dark, you can use the plus minus keys on your keyboard to brighten it up or darken it by pressing the negative sign. So again, plus will brighten it, negative will darken it. And then to exit out of the presentation mode, you simply click on this red X in the bottom corner, and it will bring you back to the default view. That is how you can create the presentation mode and show your clients the views that way. Another option is, I'm just going to go back into my door, and I'm just going to go back to 0 here. I'm going to close that door. The other option is generating a panoramic view. So in Envisioneer, you can create a panoramic view that you can then export to the Envisioneer Home View VR smartphone app. This is a great way to share your work with clients, friends, and family. To use the Generate Panoramic View feature, you need to ensure that you are in a 3D camera view, and then you need to go up and select View, Render Panoramic View. Or if you like to use the buttons down in the bottom toolbar, you will see the Render Panoramic View button. This will bring up the Render Panoramic View option. And what you'll be able to do from here is, just like when we were creating our rendered view, you're going to be able to create a panoramic view of that scene. Now, what's going to happen here is, if I was in a specific room, I would just go up and I would again go under options. And just like we did with our 3D renderings, we're going to specify the quality and the level that we want to render at. We're going to say OK. And I'm just going to bump everything down here. I want this to go pretty quick so you can see it. And we're just going to say apply and then OK. And then you're going to click on the step 1, Generate GI. When you click on this button, this calculates the global illumination of the scene. You will see a render complete message below this button once the calculation has finished. Once you've selected that, you can see here render complete. I can now select the generate faces. And when I click on that, what's going to happen is you're going to see what looks like a a box. And in each of these boxes, we're going to map out and we're going to render each of these 6 faces. So we have face 1, and we have face 2, face 3, face 4. 5 is going to be above you, and 6 is going to be below you. You are essentially inside of a cube. This is how the scenes get stitched together. So that's the back of the scene. And you can navigate around as you're doing this, and you'll be able to see each of those scenes as they render out. And again, it will step through and it will calculate each of those scenes for you. Once all of the scenes are rendered, it will be stitched together, and then you are going to be able to upload that to your HomeView VR app. So again, we just did scene 2. So I can now see the other side. So I got 1 and 2 is done. And now it's going to do 3, which is going to be essentially looking at our design, which is kind of what we want to see anyways. And we'll be able to see that in just a moment. But again, once it's finished rendering, you'll be able to upload that to your HomeView VR app. You will need to make sure that you have an account using the HomeView VR app, and then you'll be able to upload it to there. From there, in that HomeView VR app, you can then share your work with your family, friends, and clients. They will just have to have the VR app installed on their computer or on their phones as well, and then they'll be able to view it using their smartphones. I can't physically show you any of this, so in the document that I'm going to be sending out, it will have all of that information on how you can upload it to your VR app and how you can set that up and use the VR app itself. So we're just going to let that go through. It's almost done, number 3 here. And then they should load up pretty quick after that because there's really nothing left in the views themselves. Now, that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about. Again, like I mentioned, the document is going to have the HomeView VR app directions in there, so you can read through those and get an understanding of how that works. While this finishes, I'm just going to go through a quick review of what we've looked at in today's class. So rendered images are a great way to market your designs and make a lasting impression on prospective clients. To ensure your rendering success, it is important that you prepare your scene and define your rendering settings properly. Some points to remember. The most important factor in any rendering is going to be light. The program considers daylight as well as any light coming from any light fixtures that you have included. Different light fixtures cast light in different manners. Play with the lighting to ensure you use the right type of fixture and the right level of light for the scene you're trying to create. Materials have properties that determine how much the material reflects, absorbs, and emits light. Create a drawing specifically for your rendering purposes. When you are ready to render, use the Save As tool to create a copy of the drawing. Then eliminate any extra information in the copy drawing to reduce the rendering time and the file size. The higher the quality level in your rendering settings, the more photorealistic the rendering will be, but again, remember, the longer it will take to render. For smoother lines, always set your anti-aliasing values to level 5. And as you can see, the rendering has finished, and I can use my mouse now and I can start to pan around and I can see that we basically created a cube, and I can see how that design is going to look. As you can also see, it says upload to HomeView VR. I would be able to select that button, and then I can sign in to my account, and I would be able to create an actual file that would load up to my account on my phone, and I would then be able to send that off to any clients or anybody that needs to see that. But again, they will also need to have that HomeView VR app installed on their device as well. So I'm going to open up the questions and answers section. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in. I'm just going to close that down. And I'll just pause there for a moment to see if anybody has any questions about anything that we have covered in today's class. Again, like I mentioned, I will be sending out a document at the end of our class, so you will have the actual documentation that covers everything that we looked at. Should you happen to have any questions while going over that document, again, please don't hesitate, reach out, contact our support department, and they'll be happy to help you out with any questions. Perfect. Well, there doesn't appear to be any questions, so I do want to thank everybody for attending today. I do look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.